Welcome, Jelly Spoons, to this week's episode of Monday Madness, the Monday show where I talk about anything and everything. This week brings with it World Book Day, and so I'll be giving you the Traitor's Critical Role a little bit differently a little bit later on in the week, because for this episode I really want to do a World Book Day themed episode, so I'm going to talk to you about 3 books that I absolutely love, and you can probably guess what one of them is right now, because I have got my wiry ginger hair, I've got my bright blue eyes, I've got my pan-galactic gargle blaster, my towel, and most importantly, I have got a deep found love for A Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. And that is the first of the 3 books we're going to talk about, so let's dive into it right now. How did I forget to put my thumb on? That's ridiculous. I don't actually have an electronic thumb, so this will have to do. How? How did I do that entire intro in Forward Prefect and not have the thumb on? The way I'm going to do this video is I'm going to talk a little bit about the premise of each of the books. I'm then going to talk about my favourite characters, some of my favourite lines, and then I'm going to talk about why you should read it / listen to it. Whatever your preferred method of inhaling books is, just do it. So the premise then of A Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Well, some of you might be surprised to learn that there is actually more than one book. It's actually a series of books, and it just gets progressively more chaotic as they go on, which you might understand is why I love them so very much. The plot is incredibly hard to describe, so instead I shall just say that you follow the adventures of a group of people, sometimes one, sometimes all of them, and they are travelling through the galaxy, finding cricket robots and restaurants at the end of the universe, and going back to prehistoric Earth and leaving towels in lava, getting their brains annihilated by the total perspective vortex, and just so much else. The plot, as I say, is far too big and far too all-encompassing, a bit like space. It's big, really big, and there is no possible way that I could describe this. But you might have heard different bits and pieces of it, and you've probably heard of the movie. Unfortunately, the movie didn't do a completely good job of doing the source material justice. There were moments that were pretty good, but ultimately I would have to say go and read the books or do what I did and listen to the radio play. The first time I got into the story of Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy was listening to the radio show, and I listened to that a long time before I even saw the TV series, so I definitely recommend that one. It's hugely brilliant, the actors are phenomenal, and it's very, very funny. A big reason why it's so funny, particularly for me, I think, is because it is very quintessentially British humour. That's not to say other people won't get it, but when you read it or listen to it, it does just flow and feel like very British. And it is. It's very quick-witted and quippy and weird and wonderful. The dialogue is very fast and quirky. You have to keep up with it rather than being spoon-fed as you go along. And that is another reason why I love it, because much like the other books on this list and many of the books I talk about that I love so very, very much, there is no filler in A Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. There is not action all the time, but there's usually something happening. Something driving the plot forward or something just interesting happening. There's no sort of skips of any chapters for me or any moments in the radio play. Everything is interesting and funny and weird and whimsical. The characters as well are all incredibly unique and interesting. They all can stand on their own or work really well together as a group. You've got Marvin, the paranoid android. You've got Trillian and Arthur Dent, who are from the Earth. You've got Forward Prefect. You've got Zaphod Beeblebrox, the alien with 2 heads you might have seen in movies and things. And there's so many others as you go through as well that you get to meet. There's a guy called Rooster who I really love as well. But the one I'm going to talk about predominantly now is Forward Prefect.
Time is an illusion. Lunchtime doubly so.
He is very much like a sort of Doctor Who style character, and I listened to Hitchhikers before I'd watched any Doctor Who, so he was sort of my first Doctor in a weird way, and I would definitely like to see a spin-off where Forward Prefect meets the Doctor. Anyway, to introduce you to Forward Prefect properly, I'm just going to read to you from the novel, so here we go. This friend, Forward Prefect, had first arrived on the planet Earth some 15 Earth years previously, and he'd worked hard to blend himself into Earth society, with, it must be said, some success. For instance, he had spent those 15 years pretending to be an out-of-work actor, which was plausible enough. He had made one careless blunder though, because he had skimped a bit on his preparatory research. The information he had gathered had led him to choose the name Forward Prefect as being nicely inconspicuous. He was not conspicuously tall, his features were striking but not conspicuously handsome. His hair was wiry and gingerish and brushed backwards from the temples. His skin seemed to be pulled backwards from the nose. There was something very slightly odd about him, but it was difficult to say what it was. Perhaps it was that his eyes didn't seem to blink often enough, and when you talked to him for any length of time, your eyes began to involuntarily water on his behalf. Perhaps it was that he smiled slightly too broadly and gave people the unnerving impression that he was about to go for their neck. And that is the introduction we get to Ford Prefect. I loved him immediately from his first entrance into the story, and I've loved him ever since. He is chaotic and whimsical, darkly humoured and natured at times, but also just all round a great person. He is thoroughly enjoyable. I love how absolutely unashamedly strange he is. Not just when he's on the planet Earth, when he's out in space as well, his sort of natural habitat. He is still weird to other people around him, but he doesn't care. And that is and has always been hugely important to me as a fellow weird kid. It was very much a case of, yeah, be weird, have fun with it, just be yourself, who cares? If other people think you're weird, good. Keep going. And so in Ford Prefect, I really and truly did find a sort of weird space hero for myself. Very David Bowie-esque as well. But why should you read / listen to / inhale in any way you want to A Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy? Well, one, there is a lot of it. There is so much of this story. You could pick up pretty much any one of the books and you could be thrown into it and be just fine, but I would recommend doing it from the very beginning just to get the whole span of things. The characters are incredibly engaging and you follow a lot of them all the way through. And even the ones that disappear and come back, they do come back and it's really fun. And that's something else as well. Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy is just fun. It's whimsical and weird and chaotic and crazy, but they also delve deep into philosophical questions and problems, and they don't always get answers, almost inviting you to come up with your own. They get into dilemmas and scrapes where you really have to think. There are moments where you think things can't get any stranger, and then they do. You traverse an entire galaxy, learning so much along the way, not just about these characters and yourself, but also about your way of thinking. So if you fancy a quick-witted and whimsical ride through the cosmos, I recommend A Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. And now let's move on to book number 2. Next up is a book, or rather a series of books once again, and also it has a bonus extra. I am giving you a hint as to what they are right now with my terrible fangs in that I need to get replaced at some point. So the next series of books that I'm talking about with its bonus extra series is Darren Shan. Confusingly, the name of the title character, the name of the series, and the name of the author, so bear with me on this one. So predominantly I want to be talking about the saga of Darren Shan, the vampire saga, but I'm also going to give you an extra little dose of the Demonata series. This is the first one, and dear God, is this such a good series. I could not leave it out when talking about Darren Shan, so I'll predominantly be talking about the vampire, but I'm also going to talk about this just a little bit as well. I was introduced to the series of Darren Shan books at exactly the right moment in my life. I was a teenage youngster, and I was in just the right prime of my life to be reading about a teenage boy becoming a vampire and discovering a whole new crazy, terrifying world, and realizing that he is a son of destiny. Hint, hint, that's literally one of the titles of one of the books. This series, I still maintain, would make a kick-ass video game or a TV series, particularly when you think about the trials that Darren has to go through. As you could probably guess from this video, there are going to be some spoilers, but I will try not to spoil too much of the plot of this one, but I do want to reference one particular point, and that is the trials. So Darren has to go through some trials in order to essentially be allowed to keep being a vampire, in very simplifying terms. And these trials are kind of horrific, and he could die very easily at various different points, and I keep thinking about them anytime people talk about Squid Game or the Hunger Games and all these kind of series of watching people struggle in trials and tests that people really love right now. I feel like this is something we should come back to. This would make a really good series, and you could really boof up the trial part of it if you wanted to as well. So I've always thought the saga of Darren Shan, the vampire saga, would make a fantastic video game, but also a TV series as well, particularly given the current market for, well, watching suffering. If you enjoy watching suffering, yeah, this would be the series for you. It's not all doom and gloom though. There are some fantastic characters in this and some really funny moments too. Again, very British-Irish comedy in this, very dark at points, very quick-witted, very sarcastic too, particularly Darren and Mr. Crapsley. There are other characters we meet as well within the Cirque du Freak world. They're all incredibly interesting. Mr. Tinney is very interesting. In particular, I would like to say that a big chunk of why this series is so good is the relationship that's built up between Darren and his vampire mentor, Mr. Crapsley. They are fantastically well written, very well dived into. You can even read a series about Larton Crapsley's background as well. He's got a whole series about his childhood and stuff. It's really fascinating and very, very dark. This is not a series to read if you do not want characters you love to die. There is the potential for that pretty much all of the way through, and the same in the Demonata series. In fact, more so, but I'll talk about that in a second. Another reason why I absolutely love this series is for my favourite character. Now, Mr. Crapsley I do love, Darren I do also love, but my favourite, my boy, is always going to be Steve. Steve. Now, he's called Steve Leopard, but he's actually called Steve Leonard, but no one calls him that. So Steve Leopard. Now, slight spoiler alert, Steve starts off as one of Darren's sort of teenage childhood friends, and then, well, you will understand why I love this character when I say the next bit. I love watching the rise and fall of a villain. I love to understand why people are the way that they are, and Steve's journey from being this wide-eyed, interested kid who desperately wants to become a vampire to being told, no, you can't because you're evil, right off the bat as a teenager, and then how he turns and twists that and becomes who he becomes later on in the story. It's friggin' great. No spoilers, I will not give you any more because it is just so much worth reading. They're not massive books, as you can see, and you can crack through all of them. I have reread this series many times. You can do it in a few days. It's genuinely worth it. Get yourself a beverage, have a sit down, read the entire thing, listen to it, whatever you want to do. Totally worth it. If you enjoy darkness and vampires in particular and different takes on vampires and the dynamics of friends becoming enemies, becoming friends, becoming enemies, that kind of thing, and just the weird and wonderful world of the darkness, you will love the saga of Darren Shan. And then we have the other offering from the same author, Darren Shan, the Demonata series. This is darker. This goes harder. Darren Shan is sort of your warm-up. It's very interesting, very dark, very cool. This is worse in the best possible way. Again, if you are not a fan of your favourite characters being killed off at any point, maybe don't read this one. Game of Thrones, who? Screw Game of Thrones, read the Demonata series. It starts right out the bat. It is horrible. It's just so creative in its horror. It's a magnificent kind of horror. There's not just gore, there's not just violence, there's creativity, cunning, and cleverness from all the characters involved as well. And while there is comedy and whimsical moments and stuff, there is also complete tragedy, arguably right from the very beginning. And you don't quite expect it at the beginning, and then you slowly get into it. But even then, as you go through further and further into the series, you're still not expecting all the different things that happen. So, highly recommend the Demonata series. Lord Loss, you need to meet. But what is next on my third and final offering of books that I love? Well, hint, hint, it is yet another series. I'm going to go and get into another bit of cosplay. This one might take a while because I'm still not sure which wig to wear. This third and final book is also part of a series. You may well have heard of a couple of the books in this series, but you might not have heard of this one in particular, which is why I really want to bring it to your attention. So, the book I am particularly talking about today is The Silver Chair, and the series, of course, is The Chronicles of Narnia. Within this series, you have most likely heard of The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, possibly Prince Caspian, and probably The Voyage of the Dawn Treader as well. But there are 7 books in this series, meaning there is so much more lore to this than you have probably ever thought of, and that is why I'm recommending it to you, because even if you have read these before, go back and redo it. And if you haven't, welcome to the world of Narnia! It is so much bigger than you realised, and it is not just The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, nor is it just the Pevensey children at all. The book I want to particularly draw your attention to is The Silver Chair, which is my favourite of the whole series. It's number 6 out of the 7, so I do recommend reading it all the way from the beginning to get up to it, but equally you could just enjoy The Silver Chair as a standalone book if you want to. I'm going to try not to give you too many spoilers, but it's really difficult to do while talking about the plot of The Silver Chair, so here we go. This story involves some characters you might have met before if you've enjoyed The Voyage of the Dawn Treader. There's a character called Eustace Scrubb who really comes into his own and becomes a much better character by the end of the story. He is in this as well, along with some new characters you might not have met before. Possibly most importantly of all of these is the character of Prince Caspian. Now, a lot of you might remember Prince Caspian as portrayed by the ever wonderful Ben Barnes, and Prince Caspian is also in The Silver Chair, but it is many years later. He is now an old man, an old king, and his son, Prince Rilian, is missing. And that is the big premise of this story. Prince Rilian is missing, and the 2 children must go and search for the missing prince before, essentially, Prince Caspian dies without finding his son. How many spoilers do I want to give? How many spoilers do I want to give? I'm gonna try not to, but I have to describe one of my favourite points of this book, which is, of course, I love a good character suffering story. It's why I love the Dragonlance musical, Posthenius Britannia, so very much. I just love seeing Raistlin suffer. And there's actually a very similar dynamic in the story of The Silver Chair. So if you've watched any of my content about Raistlin and Takesis, the dark goddess who essentially controls him with magic. It's complicated, but there's a very similar dynamic in this with the Lady of the Green Curdle. She is epic badass. If you enjoy a villain, as I do, you will enjoy her. And she, in her, I was going to say possession and then change my mind, but actually no, possession is correct. She has a sort of manservant in her possession, and he is fairly cheerful when he's talking to the children, but he explains that overnight he is overcome with this sort of mad sickness, which means that he must be bound to the silver chair every night in case he becomes dangerous and hurts people. That, it turns out, shockingly, is not entirely true. And what really happens to him overnight is something the children find out, and it, drives a lot of the rest of the plot of the story. I'm going to leave it there with as minimal spoilers as possible, and now I'll move on to my favourite character. So my favourite character from the silver chair, shockingly enough, is the young man who is tied into the silver chair every night. That should come as no surprise to any of you whatsoever, whether I am writing my own stuff, whether I'm reading it. I love a good bit of, I have to overcome something before I can go to the next part of my story. I have to overcome evil, or become evil, or get seduced by it, or some struggle and suffering. Just, yes, I love it. And so that is a big part of why I love this. The characters are also very well defined, very well written. There are some really funny moments, there are some shocking moments, some sad moments. And going back to the series as a whole, there is so much lore here. I love diving into a world in its entirety. It's another big reason why I love these 3-book series altogether. I love The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy and the world that it shows you. You never get all of it, but you get so much. And even the bits you don't explore all the way, you hear snippets of all the way through. The same with Darren Shan. He sets up this entire new world of vampires, and again, you don't get to see all of it, but the bits that you do in whatever series you're in, and the world of demons as well, you get to learn so much. And here again we have it with the Chronicles of Narnia. If you go all the way back, you go back in time with the Magician's Nephew, and you get to before the Pevensey children went through that wardrobe. You get before the lamppost was in Narnia. You find out why it's there, and it's just this huge, sumptuous bit of lore. I love it so much. And also, if I ever own a castle, I am naming it Cair Paravel. There is something for everyone in this series. There is battle, there is combat, there is fighting, there is interpersonal relationships, there is adventure, there is comedy, there is tragedy, there is pretty much everything you could possibly want. And again, they're not very long books. You could definitely crack through this series in a couple of days if you wanted to. For this one, I am dressed as a sort of version of Prince Caspian, because he is also in the silver chair, and I love him very much. I can never do Ben Barnes justice, though. I have cosplayed his Darkling, though. Bing! And that was one of my finest moments, attempting to get his facial structure with lots of contouring. But anyway, that brings us to the end of this video. So, happy World Book Day. What are your favourite books? Let me know in the comments down below. Are you going to dress up for World Book Day? If so, who are you going to dress up as, or closet cosplay as, or be inspired by, something like that? If you're an artist making art, you're going to make art of your favourite characters. If you're a fan fiction writer, what are you going to write about? I'm going to do pretty much all of these. I'll probably be dressed up and writing fan fiction and making art. So many things to be doing. And that's why I'm bringing you this video today on Monday Madness. 1, because it's Monday and we have to bring you a video, and 2, so that you've got a few more days to plan what you might be doing for World Book Day later on in the week. Alright, my wonderful jelly spoons, I love you all very, very much. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your week and a marvellous World Book Day. Let me know your thoughts and feelings in the comments down below. I will bring you the traitors very, very soon. I'm also going to switch up the concept for that just a little bit because I want to make it happen a little bit faster, and I'm going to bring you the next part of the OC story, which is coming to a close. In fact, we could just call it Consecrated Blood now, couldn't we? Because I have let you know the working title. Yeah, I'll bring you the next part of Consecrated Blood, the OC story, on Friday as well. And look out on the Peter Pan lore TikTok and YouTube pages as well, because that's where I'll be doing a World Book Day video on Peter Pan, of course. Alright, my wonderful jelly spoons, goodbye, see you soon, don't forget to hydrate, bye!
It's very simple. My client, Mr. Dent, says he will stop lying here in the mud on the sole condition that you take over from him.
What are you talking about? In front of the bulldozer?
Yes.
Instead of Mr. Dent?
Yes.
In the mud?
In, as you say, the mud.